Europe, cobblestone streets, medieval castles, electric cars. But what you don't see is what's forbidden, because there are vehicles, some famous, others surprising, that you will never be able to drive legally on this continent. Not because of their speed or their price, but simply because they're just too dangerous, polluting, or uncontrollable for European standards. Today, you're going to discover 5 cars you probably didn't know are banned in Europe. Some because they're rolling weapons, others because they're so unsafe they shouldn't even exist. And at the end, I'll reveal a new European regulation that threatens to wipe thousands more cars off the map, no matter if they're still running perfectly. If you've ever seen a Chevrolet Camaro ZL1, 1LE, you know it's not just any car. It's aggressive, it's loud, it's pure testosterone on wheels. But in Europe, that roar was never officially heard on the streets. The reason? It wasn't because of pollution or the price. It was because this Camaro could literally cut people in half. Too much of an exaggeration? Not so much if we look at the details. This model was designed for the track with extreme aerodynamics and components built for high performance. Among them, a front splitter, that piece that looks like a sharp lip at the bottom of the bumper, made of rigid materials that dangerously stick out forward. The European Union regulations, especially the Pedestrian Protection Regulation, Regulation EC 78/2009, are clear. Any component that increases harm in the event of a collision with a pedestrian must be removed or redesigned. And the Camaro ZL1 1LE didn't pass the test, not even close. But that wasn't the only reason. Its 6.2-liter V8 engine, its deafening exhaust, its emissions, its massive fuel consumption, all of it made it a wild beast by the demanding European standards. Maybe the Camaro ZL1 1LE wasn't designed for Europe, but its story serves as a perfect example of how a radical design can become illegal, no matter how much car enthusiasts love it. Not all cars banned in Europe are powerful, expensive, or built for the track. Sometimes what gets them disqualified isn't what they have, but what they're missing. And that's the case with the 1997 Kia Rio, especially in its version for Latin America. A modest, urban, fuel-efficient car. Nothing spectacular. But behind its affordable price hid an uncomfortable truth. It was a coffin on wheels. To understand this, you just have to look at the crash tests carried out by Latin NCAP, the organization that evaluates the safety of vehicles sold in our region. The Kia Rio, in its Latin American version, received 0 stars for adult protection. 0. Now let's pause for a moment. This same model, sold in Europe, did meet the minimum safety requirements. Airbags, stability control, reinforced structure. So why the difference? Because even though the car has the same name, the standards are not the same, and Europe does not allow cars to be sold that don't protect the lives of those who drive them. The most shocking part is this: if you imported a Kia Rio from Latin America to Europe, just as it is, you wouldn't be able to register it. It wouldn't even pass the first technical inspection. In other words, it's not that it's explicitly forbidden, it's just that it doesn't even meet the bare minimum requirements. And in a continent that takes road safety seriously, that's basically the same as being illegal. When you think of an unsafe car, you picture something old, rusty, with no brakes. But sometimes the problem isn't the age, it's the intention behind how it was built. And this case is clear proof of that. The Hyundai Grand i10 arrived in Latin America as an affordable, modern, compact solution. At first glance, it looks like the perfect city car. Easy to park, fuel efficient, and above all, brand new. But what most buyers didn't know is that this very same car, just as it's sold here, would be unacceptable in Europe. Yes, a brand new car, but without effective protection in frontal or side impacts, not enough airbags, no electronic stability control, and a weak structure that doesn't properly absorb impacts. In fact, in a frontal collision, the driver could suffer severe head and chest injuries even at moderate speeds. Meanwhile, the European version of the same model with a different name or more features. And why is there such a big difference? Because Europe doesn't allow vehicles to be sold that don't actively protect their occupants. Over there, safety isn't an extra, it's required by law. This Hyundai Grand i10, which so many people consider reliable just because it's new and from a well-known brand, could never be legally driven in most of Europe. And even though it's not on any official blacklist, its safety level is so low that it's basically banned by default. There are cars that are born to break records, to make history. And then there's the Jaguar XJ220 Sun, a car that was too much even for that. When Jaguar introduced the XJ220 in the 90s, they did it with the ambition of building the fastest production car in the world. And for a brief moment they pulled it off. This British missile reached 341 kilometers per hour. But Jaguar didn't stop there. They decided to create an even more radical version, lighter, more extreme, the XJ220S. Only 6 units in the entire world, all with one mission: to be almost illegal. The result? Banned. First in the United States, where safety regulations required side impact bars, airbags, and anti-lock brakes. Things the XJ220S didn't even consider important. And even though some countries in Europe allowed it as a collector's vehicle, several nations banned it from being used on public roads. Why? Because the authorities considered it too dangerous to drive on the streets. On top of that, its exhaust and emission system were completely outside European standards even back in the 90s. And although it was beautiful, its flat and sharp design made it especially dangerous for pedestrians, according to today's road safety standards. Conclusion: the Jaguar XJ220S is one of those cars that made history, but couldn't be a part of it on European streets. Have you ever heard the phrase, less is more? Well, in the world of cars, sometimes less is just not enough. And that's what doomed the Lotus Elise Series I. Launched in 1996, this British car was a gem for purists. It weighed only 720 kilos. Yes, you heard that right, less than many large displacement motorcycles. It was like a street-legal racing cart, designed to deliver a visceral, direct, no-frills driving experience. For many, that was the magic. The Elise Series I offered a connection to the asphalt that few cars have ever matched. But for the authorities, that was exactly what was so alarming. In Europe, although it was initially approved in some countries, the Lotus Elise started to run into problems as road safety laws evolved. Its lack of airbags, weak side and front protection, and such a lightweight structure that barely offered any impact absorption made it an obvious risk for the driver in the event of an accident. Even worse, its low height and minimalist design made it virtually invisible to modern SUVs and trucks, which drastically increased the risk of serious accidents. Europe wasn't so strict at first, but over the years, several cities and countries excluded it from their regular vehicle fleets, especially in areas with reinforced emissions or safety regulations. Since 2023, several European cities have started to implement partial or total bans on cars with internal combustion engines, especially models from before the Euro 4 and Euro 5 standards, which regulate pollutant emissions. In countries like Germany, France, Spain, Belgium, or Italy, there are already areas called low-emission zones or LEZs, where only vehicles with an environmental label issued according to their pollution level are allowed to drive. And if your car doesn't have that label, either because it's too old or because it was never certified for those standards, then you can't enter even if it's in perfect condition. This isn't an exception. It's a trend. Cities like Paris, Berlin, Madrid, or Brussels are closing their downtown areas to polluting vehicles, and year after year the criteria are getting stricter. Even worse, the European Union has already passed a law that bans the sale of new combustion engine cars starting in 2035. That includes not only gasoline cars, but also diesels and even some hybrids. In other words, the end of traditional engines is no longer a prediction, it's a countdown. Cars that for decades were icons, Peugeot 206, Renault Clio 1.2, gasoline Ford Focus, diesel Volkswagen Golf, even modern SUVs without hybrid technology. All of them are being phased out, and in just a few years they will be legally banned in much of the continent. Europe is making a big bet on sustainable mobility, and in the process it's marking the beginning of a new era. One in which many cars, no matter how useful, fast, or safe they are, will be left behind. So the next time you see a car you like, ask yourself, will it be legal to drive it in Europe? Because over there, design matters, speed fascinates. But if it's not safe or if it pollutes more than allowed, it has no place on their streets. And maybe what we see as normal today will just be a museum piece tomorrow.